He said he never wanted kids, so she gave herself 4. Not out of spite, not to prove anything. She did it because love wasn't supposed to wait for permission. And motherhood? That was never a discussion for her. It was a promise to herself. Years ago, he built a world out of machines and stock shares. She built one out of bedtime stories and tiny socks. His boardroom echoed with applause. Her hallway echoed with tiny footsteps. He had empires. She had everything else. But the moment he saw them, 4 small, curious faces peeking out from behind the curtain, each one holding a sliver of his jawline, his eyes, his fire, he stopped breathing. The crowd roared for her. But all he could hear was the memory of his voice from years ago. Children complicate things. She stood center stage, confident, radiant, untouchable. And there they were, clustered behind her. A legacy he never meant to leave. He wasn't invited. He hadn't even known they existed. But standing there, frozen in his tailored suit, Kyle Stroud, the man who had once sworn never to become a father, couldn't look away. Not from her, and not from them. Kyle Stroud didn't just break into tech, he bent it to his will. By 32, he'd already walked away from 2 sold-out startups and was running one of the most disruptive AI firms in the country. Investors begged for his time. World leaders quoted his work. Magazines named him one of the sharpest minds of his generation. But power came with a price, and he paid in silence. He kept his penthouse dark. He liked his office colder than most. He didn't believe in birthday parties, weekend getaways, or dinner with friends. His calendar ran his life, and it never made space for people who needed affection, especially not children. To Kyle, kids were noise, sticky hands, sudden fevers, crayon marks on walls, and unpredictable bedtimes, things he couldn't optimize, things that didn't follow logic. He believed in clean lines and clearer boundaries, in efficiency, precision, results. And when Ayanna, his then wife, began whispering about nurseries and baby names, Kyle responded the only way he knew how. That's not part of the vision. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg her to stay. He simply let the door close, and never asked where she went. There were no late-night phone calls, no regret messages. He buried himself in code and capital. He won awards, built campuses, signed deals that made headlines. But on the nights when the city lights blinked outside his window, Kyle would sometimes pause and wonder what kind of woman walks away from a billionaire. Ayanna Murray had eyes that didn't just look at you, they studied you, not to judge, but to understand. She carried herself like poetry wrapped in discipline, a woman whose presence felt like calm in a world full of chaos. Ayanna didn't speak loudly, but when she did, people leaned in. She didn't chase the spotlight, yet somehow it always found her. Years ago, she married Kyle in a quiet ceremony under golden lights. There were no celebrity guests, no viral photos, just 2 souls with different dreams, thinking love could bridge the distance. She believed in shared meals and slow mornings. He believed in quarterly targets and 5-year projections. Still, she tried. For a while, Ayanna adjusted, smiled in rooms where she felt invisible, tried to turn cold metal into warmth, tried to be enough for a man who was terrified of needing anyone. But the turning point came softly, not in a fight, not in a dramatic outburst. Just a moment, early morning light spilling into the kitchen, her hands resting on her stomach, her heart already planning lullabies. She told him, and he didn't flinch, didn't argue. "You know how I feel," he said, sipping coffee like it was just another Monday. Ayanna walked away the next week. No shouting, no second chances, just a single suitcase, and a future she would write without him. She disappeared from the headlines. But her absence lingered like a song cut off mid-note. What Kyle didn't know, what he never thought to ask, was what Ayanna chose to become after she left. Not bitter, not broken, but a mother. 4 times over. The room buzzed with industry giants, young innovators and investors ready to pour millions into the next big idea. Kyle Stroud sat near the front, barely listening. He wasn't there for inspiration. He was there because people expected him to be. Then the host announced the keynote speaker, Ayanna Murray. Kyle's eyes narrowed. The name rang in his mind like a bell struck too hard. Before he could process the weight of it, she walked onto the stage. And the noise in his head went still. She moved like someone who no longer carried the weight of proving herself. Her posture was proud, her voice steady, her eyes clear. Ayanna had changed. But she hadn't faded. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, until something shifted stage right. 4 children appeared near the curtain, 2 boys, 2 girls, wearing matching tech camp shirts with badges clipped to their collars. They peeked out playfully, trying not to distract, but their presence did more than turn heads. It shattered Kyle, because those weren't just any kids. A boy with his brow, a girl with his jawline, another with his posture, standing like he had something to prove. And the 4th, quieter than the rest, watched the room like it owed him answers. That look Kyle knew too well. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Kyle saw pieces of himself in every one of them. The crowd smiled at the adorable disruption. Kyle didn't move. His mind flooded with questions. Were they hers? Were they his? Ayanna didn't glance in his direction. She remained composed, commanding the room with a grace that cut deeper than any confrontation. She wasn't hiding them. She just wasn't performing for him. Kyle's hands clenched in his lap, because in that moment, all his silence, all his control, meant nothing. Not when 4 children stood in front of him, and he had no idea they even existed. He stayed in his seat long after the crowd cleared. The applause faded. Conversations buzzed around him, but Kyle sat still, not because he didn't know what to do, but because for the first time in years, he didn't feel like himself. Something cracked that day, not publicly, not loudly, just enough for light to seep in. Ayanna hadn't tried to show off those children. She wasn't flaunting a life he missed out on. She was simply living it, fully, boldly, quietly, and they were real, not concepts, not hypotheticals. They had names, personalities, probably my favorite cereals, and he hadn't even known they existed. What else have I missed? Could I still matter to them, if I never mattered before? He had built a billion-dollar company from nothing, but right now, the only thing he wanted it was a chance to be something, to someone, not a mogul, not a headline, just a father. And the haunting truth settled in his chest like a weight he couldn't lift. Maybe wanting them now doesn't erase the years he didn't. Let me ask you something. Have you ever realized too late what your heart wanted all along? Have you ever stood on the outside of a life you could have had, watching it bloom without you? Because that's where this story begins. Not with a breakup, not with success, but with the question that echoes louder than regret. Is it ever too late to become the partner or parent you once refused to be? If you believe in second chances, if you've ever had to learn love the hard way, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Leonardo Stories, where we don't just tell stories, we rebuild what people thought was lost. They met before the headlines, before the boardrooms, before the world started calling Kyle Stroud a genius. Back then, he was just a man with an idea, and a dream stitched together by sleepless nights and second-hand laptops. Ayanna was studying child psychology. He was building neural maps in a dusty co-working space with cracked tiles and bad coffee. They met over a broken printer. She needed a paper printed for class. He offered to fix it, for a date. She laughed. "You fix it first." He did. They went out that night, and the next, and the one after that. She liked puzzles. He liked silence. She danced in the kitchen. He watched from the doorway. They fit, not perfectly, but just enough for it to feel like fate, trying something new. Kyle wasn't romantic, but he listened. Ayanna wasn't needy, but she hoped. For a while, love was enough. They moved into a small apartment with slanted floors and windows that begged for curtains. They cooked together, fell asleep with laptops on their chests, shared long silences that didn't feel empty yet. He'd pace, muttering code, She'd hum softly while grading essays or reading studies on child development. In the middle of it all, she'd pause, hand on her stomach sometimes, not because she was expecting, but because she was hoping to. Kyle noticed. He just never asked, because even then he knew they weren't dreaming the same dream. Kyle's startup exploded faster than either of them expected. One viral demo turned into $1 million seed round. One algorithm caught the attention of a Fortune 100 CEO. Soon, he was flying out twice a week. Meetings, panels, private dinners. Ayana adjusted. She kissed him at the airport, waited up with dinner, listened to his ideas like they were sacred. But slowly, his world began to orbit further from hers. She talked about opening a daycare center one day. He suggested she wait until things settled. She mentioned how much she loved seeing kids walk home from school. He reminded her how unpredictable they could be. She floated the idea of getting a dog, just to practice. He dismissed it with a distracted nod. The distance wasn't sharp. It was slow, like water creeping into a crack before winter. You don't notice it until something breaks. Ayana brought up children carefully at first, gentle suggestions, soft questions. What would you name a daughter if we had one? Kyle would shrug. I haven't thought about it. You ever wonder what kind of dad you'd be? He'd smile, politely, the kind who hires the best tutors. She laughed, but deep down, she didn't. The truth wasn't cruel. It was clear. Kyle loved control. He needed focus. Children didn't fit into that architecture. To him, they were variables, too loud, too messy, too human. To her, they were the dream. It was a Sunday morning, the kind of morning Ayana usually cherished. Warm light through the blinds, music humming low in the kitchen, coffee she made just the way he liked it. She wore one of his old hoodies. He was already at the dining table, typing with the intensity of someone chasing a deadline. She sat across from him, holding a folded sheet of paper. He didn't look up. Kyle, she said softly, can we talk? He nodded, still typing. It's important. His fingers paused, mid-sentence, but he didn't close the laptop. Instead, he leaned back slightly, giving her his face but not his full attention. She unfolded the paper. It was a printout of an early ultrasound schedule, no images, just dates. He stared at it. I made an appointment, she said. I want to know if this is still a conversation worth having. Kyle's expression didn't shift. Not in anger, not in joy. He looked at the paper, like it was a menu from a restaurant he didn't recognize. Ayana, he began, his voice steady. You know how I feel. She nodded. I do. I just hoped that maybe... He exhaled slowly, resting his elbows on the table. Children are distractions, he said gently. They pull your focus. They change things. I've worked too hard to lose momentum now. I'm not asking you to lose anything, she replied. I'm asking you to share something. He looked down. I can't be what you want. I never said I could. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked at him like she was trying to memorize who he was, one last time. She stood, walked to the bedroom, and began folding her clothes into a bag. Kyle didn't follow, didn't stop her, didn't ask if she needed help. By noon, the apartment was silent again. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was empty. The front door didn't slam. It clicked, softly, precisely. Like Ayana knew even the sound of her leaving might startle him, so she gave him silence. Kyle stood in the hallway, staring at the space she'd just walked through. Her coat was gone. So was her favorite mug, the one with the faded sunflower she'd insisted on keeping even when it cracked. She hadn't packed much, just enough for someone who already knew she wasn't coming back. On the kitchen counter, she left her key beside a small note. 3 words. Take care, Kyle. No signature. She didn't need one. He stared at the note for a long time, then folded it, slid it into a drawer he never opened again. That night, he worked until the sun came up. Meetings, emails, charts, expansion plans. He made it through the next morning with a strong espresso and no sleep. He told himself she needed time, told himself It wasn't final. Told himself she'd understand. But days turned into weeks, and the stillness became normal. No more music in the kitchen, no soft laughter during phone calls with her sister, no smell of lavender in the bathroom after her long showers. Just Kyle, and the quiet he thought he wanted. He'd built his entire life around control, and he got exactly what he asked for. No noise, no surprises, no family, just a clean calendar, and the hum of machines. The seasons changed, but Kyle didn't. Not in the way people hoped he would. He scaled the company faster than predicted, opened new offices, launched partnerships overseas. His name stayed on lists, Forbes Inc., Tech Weekly. But his home never changed. The same couch, the same kitchen, the same spare bedroom that Ayanna once suggested they turn into a nursery. He left it empty, not because he couldn't afford to fill it, but because he couldn't decide what to fill it with. He dated occasionally, but no one ever stayed. Some said he was too distant, others too precise. One woman told him bluntly, "You don't want love. You want an assistant who kisses you." He didn't argue. He simply deleted her number that night. What he never said out loud was this: he did want love. He just didn't know how to share space with it. Ayanna had asked for something real, something alive. He gave her spreadsheets and strategies. He thought he could build forever without building a home. But late at night, when the lights dimmed and the city turned quiet, he'd sometimes stop in that empty hallway and listen for something that had left years ago. A laugh, a lullaby, the sound of soft footsteps. They never came, and he never tried to bring them back. Until one afternoon in Atlanta, Kyle Stroud didn't slow down. Not after the split, not after the silence. If anything, he moved faster. Faster deals, bigger numbers, louder rooms filled with people who quoted him more than they questioned him. His company opened offices in 6 countries. His net worth tripled before he turned 37. Every major publication wanted his opinion on the future of artificial intelligence. He gave interviews, sat on panels, wore expensive watches he never looked at. To the world, he was untouchable. But in the stillness of his penthouse, where no one asked him about fatherhood, warmth, or forgiveness, he was alone. He filled the space with tech, walls that responded to his voice, a mirror that told him the weather, a fridge that restocked itself with what it assumed he liked. But it never asked what he needed, and he never corrected it. There was a time when Kyle thought quiet was power. Now it clung to him like a weight. He had no family photos, no shoes by the door, no extra toothbrush tucked in a drawer. Every surface was immaculate. Every room looked staged, like no one lived there, because no one did. He had built the kind of life people envied, but he could no longer ignore one truth. Every win echoed louder than the last, because there was no one left to share it with. The invitation arrived weeks in advance. The Future Tech Global Summit, a prestigious gathering of minds shaping tomorrow. Kyle had spoken at it 3 years in a row, but this time he chose to attend as a guest. He didn't need more exposure. He needed perspective, or so he told himself. Atlanta was vibrant that weekend, banners flying, hotel lobbies buzzing, young engineers walking around in sneakers and ambition. Kyle arrived alone. No assistant, no entourage, just him in a charcoal suit and the quiet hum of curiosity behind his eyes. He checked into his suite, bypassed the welcome dinner, and reviewed the agenda for the next day. Most of it looked familiar. Panels on ethical AI, smart cities, and automation in education. But one name made his fingers pause. Keynote speaker, Ayanna Murray. He read it twice, 3 times. The bio listed her as the founder of a non-profit empowering underserved youth through tech education. Her face wasn't printed next to it, but her name was enough. Kyle's pulse didn't race. His hands didn't shake. But something inside him shifted. He hadn't spoken her name in years, hadn't needed to. He'd buried her in a folder marked necessary loss and moved forward. But now she was here. Speaking, leading, thriving. And despite everything he had, Kyle realized he wasn't ready. Not to see her, not to face whatever life she had built in the space he left behind. Still, he showed up the next morning, early, sat near the front of the auditorium, straight back, still expression. The lights dimmed. The announcer stepped up to the podium. "Please welcome our keynote speaker, Ayana Murray." And just like that, without warning, without apology, the woman who once held his heart walked back into his world. She walked on stage with ease. Not the showy kind of confidence that demands applause, but the kind that deserves it. Her presence didn't chase attention, it held it. The room quieted, not because it was told to, but because it wanted to hear what she had to say. Ayana stood at the center of the spotlight in a tailored navy jumpsuit, her curls pinned up, no jewelry but a slim watch, and an energy Kyle hadn't felt in years. She looked powerful, not in the way he once measured power, not by titles or valuations, but by purpose. She smiled gently at the audience, then at someone backstage. Kyle followed her gaze, and there they were. 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. They peered out from behind the curtain, amused and curious, matching lanyards around their necks, small hands clutching programs, faces eager but respectful. They didn't rush the stage. They didn't need to. They just watched. Ayana cleared her throat, and the mic picked up the softness in her voice. "Years ago, I left a very comfortable life. I was married to a man the world considered brilliant. And he is. But brilliance doesn't always mean belonging." Kyle sat still, expression unreadable. "I left not because I wanted less, but because I wanted more. I wanted to build something that didn't exist yet, something gentle, something lasting." The crowd nodded. A few leaned forward in their seats. "This," she gestured toward a projected image of kids using donated tablets in a classroom, "is what came next. My non-profit started with 1 borrowed laptop and a class of 12. Now we serve over 3,000 students nationwide." The room broke into applause. Kyle didn't clap. He couldn't. Because while everyone was celebrating her success, he was staring at the truth. She had built something without him, and it was better than anything he could have imagined. Kyle had always been good at seeing patterns. That's what made him successful. Spotting inefficiencies, gaps in code, missed details in billion-dollar deals. But nothing could have prepared him for the pattern now staring back at him from stage left. The first boy, tallest of the group, stood with his arms crossed and 1 foot angled just slightly outward. It was the exact stance Kyle made when he was deep in thought. The girl next to him had Ayana's cheekbones. But when she smiled, Kyle saw his crooked grin. The kind he hated in photos. The kind Ayana used to call charming when it's real. The second boy tilted his head while listening to the speech. Focused, unblinking, quietly intense. And the last one, smaller, maybe the youngest by minutes, watched everything from a slight distance. Not disengaged, just cautious. His hands were tucked into his sleeves, and his expression didn't shift once. Kyle recognized that kind of stillness. He used to live in it. He wasn't sure what they'd been told. Maybe nothing, maybe everything, but they were there, present, observant, undeniably connected to her, and, deep down, connected to him. Kyle tried to breathe slowly, but his chest was tight. The room was no warmer, but his collar suddenly felt too stiff. A wave of thoughts crashed in his mind. Are they hers? Are they his? Was there someone else? Did she do this alone? The weight of what he might have missed sat heavily in his throat. The children whispered to each other, just barely, and then turned their attention back to the stage, back to their mother. Kyle blinked. Their mother, the woman he once promised to build forever with, had built something without him. Something living, something breathing, something that looked like him. The applause broke out before she even finished speaking. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, a few even whistling. Ayana gave a soft nod, not to feed off the attention but to acknowledge it. Kyle didn't move. He sat perfectly still, hands folded, face neutral, but his eyes were fixed on the side of the stage, on the children. They stepped forward a little now, joining their mother. One held her hand. Another leaned gently into her side. The smallest one lifted his chin and scanned the room like he was guarding something. Kyle felt the breath leave his body again, not because of anger, not from shock, but because of the ache that had finally taken shape. Those weren't strangers. They weren't just some kids Ayanna was mentoring through her non-profit. They were hers, and they looked enough like him to haunt the rest of his life. Ayanna's eyes scanned the crowd briefly. She didn't pause on him, didn't blink, didn't flinch. She simply gathered her papers, motioned gently for the kids to follow, and walked off stage. Just like that, Kyle's legs felt heavy when he stood. The people around him were already talking, debating her ideas, complimenting her grace, discussing partnerships. The world kept turning. But inside Kyle, something had tilted. He walked out of the auditorium without saying a word to anyone. His phone buzzed. 3 missed calls, a dozen emails. He didn't answer any of them. Outside, the Atlanta sun was high and hot, casting sharp shadows across the pavement. Kyle stood at the curb, hands in his pockets, his heart louder than the traffic. The questions spun in his mind, each heavier than the last. How long had she raised them? Why didn't she tell him? Would he have even been ready if she had? He thought of the apartment, the spare room, the empty hallway, all the space he'd left untouched, while she had filled her world with life. And now, for the first time in a long time, Kyle wasn't sure of anything. Except for one thing. He couldn't pretend anymore. Kyle had faced down corporate spies, federal audits, and boardroom betrayal. But nothing unnerved him like what he had seen that day on stage. The faces, the eyes, the reflection of himself, in a life that didn't include him. That night, he couldn't sleep. He didn't turn on the TV, didn't pour a drink, didn't touch his laptop. He just sat on the edge of his hotel bed, staring out the window at the Atlanta skyline, trying to rearrange everything he thought he knew. There was only one person who could confirm the truth. Ayanna. But Kyle wasn't ready, not for that conversation, not yet. So he did what he'd always done when faced with uncertainty. He went around it. First thing the next morning, he made a call to a private security firm he had used once during a merger investigation. He didn't give them much to go on. 4 children, ages around 5 or 6, all connected to Ayanna Murray. I need to know if they're hers, and if there's anyone else. The man on the other end didn't ask why, just said it would take a day, maybe 2. Kyle hung up and sat back in the silence. This time, it wasn't comforting. It felt like punishment. He wasn't proud of what he'd done, sending someone else to do the looking. But he needed facts before feelings, proof before confrontation. At least that's what he told himself. Because the alternative, walking up to her and asking, "Are they mine?" felt too vulnerable, too real. And Kyle had spent most of his adult life building walls tall enough to keep that kind of real out. The file came back the next afternoon. Encrypted, clean, tightly compiled. Kyle sat in his home office with the blinds half drawn. No music, no distractions. He opened the file and scrolled slowly. First, Ayanna Murray, still legally unmarried, no partner on record. Then, the children, Zuri Murray, Leora Murray, Nasir Murray, Cairo Murray. All were born in the same year. 4 separate birth certificates. Each one listed the same mother, Ayanna Inez Murray. Each one left the space for the father's name. Blank. Kyle leaned forward, reading every line as if one might suddenly change. No mention of adoption, no signs of surrogacy, no legal guardianship outside of Ayanna. Every official document pointed to one thing: she'd raised them alone. Not quietly, not in secret, just without him. Kyle exhaled through his nose and rubbed his palms together slowly. He looked again at the birth dates. All the same. They were born just over 5 years ago, less than a year after she walked away. His heart thudded against his chest. That timeline wasn't an accident. It was intentional, inevitable even. She didn't waste time moving on. She moved forward, with purpose. He remembered the day she left. The note, the silence. How convinced he'd been that she'd come back once she cooled off. But now, it was obvious. She hadn't walked away from him. She'd walked toward something she knew he would never choose. A future without him. And for the first time in years, Kyle felt something heavy in his throat that wouldn't clear. Regret. He didn't make an appointment. He didn't send a message ahead of time. He just showed up. The final day of the summit was slower, vendors packing up, speakers chatting over coffee, volunteers folding chairs and taping boxes. Kyle moved past all of it with a focus that startled even himself. The coordinator hesitated when he asked where Ayana's prep room was, but the badge around his neck and the weight of his name got him an answer. He walked down a short hallway lined with dressing rooms and paused at the last door. Her name was printed neatly on a strip of paper taped above the handle. Ayana Mare. He knocked once. Softly. She opened the door halfway. Her expression didn't change when she saw him. No surprise, no smile, just a long, unreadable look. Kyle. He swallowed. Can I come in? She hesitated, then stepped back. The room was small. Mirrors, a garment rack, scattered notebooks, a laptop still open beside a steaming cup of tea. Kyle didn't sit. I saw them. Ayana nodded slowly. I figured you would. They're yours? She tilted her head, eyes steady. Do you think I'd raise someone else's children and call them mine? His chest tightened. There's no father listed. There was no father present, she replied. He looked away, jaw clenched. Ayana. He started, unsure of how to form the sentence. Why didn't you tell me? Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because you said you didn't want children. That was before. No, she cut in, calm but firm. That was during. When it mattered, he said nothing. I didn't hide them from you, Kyle. I let you live the life you said you needed. I didn't chase you. I didn't punish you. I simply chose a different future. Without me. Exactly. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cruel. She was honest. And somehow, that made it worse. Kyle stood there, silent, still trying to frame her words as something less final, still hoping for a version of the past where they had both misunderstood each other. But Ayana didn't leave space for misinterpretation. She crossed her arms, leaned lightly against the edge of the table, and met his gaze without flinching. You said children would ruin your rhythm, that they'd clutter your world, and that love, real, consuming, daily love, was too expensive, too distracting. I didn't mean it like that, Kyle started. You meant it exactly like that, she interrupted. And I heard you. So I believed you. Kyle's mouth opened, then closed again. There was no escaping those words. He had spoken them without hesitation, without apology, because back then he thought Ayana would stay anyway. But she hadn't. I respected your boundaries, she continued, even when they broke my heart. But I couldn't keep waiting for a version of you that might someday change. You wanted a legacy, she said, her voice growing quieter. I wanted a life. So, I gave myself one. It wasn't spiteful. It wasn't even emotional. It was a statement of fact. And that's what hurt the most. Kyle lowered his head, fingers tightening at his sides. He had spent years convincing himself that she would eventually circle back. That's what they had was simply on pause. But Ayana had moved forward, fully, completely, without looking back. And now, the children he never thought he wanted had grown without him, laughed without him, learned to walk, to talk, to dream without him. All because of one thing he once said without blinking. Children are distractions. Now they were 4 living reminders of what he could never get back. The silence between them stretched. Not awkward, not cold, just heavy. Kyle shifted his weight, unsure of how to exist in that room, how to stand in front of a woman who had moved on without his blessing, and didn't need his permission to do so. You did it alone? He asked finally, voice low. All of it. Ayana nodded. Every appointment, every birth, every night one of them wouldn't sleep, every fever, every school form, every story at bedtime. She looked past him now, her tone softer, but not alone in a sad way. I wasn't lonely, Kyle. I was full. Exhausted, yes, but full. Her words didn't accuse. They simply existed. Kyle stepped back slightly, leaning against the closed door. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I didn't know. You didn't ask. Another quiet truth. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was just speaking plainly. And Kyle, so used to control, to certainty, to binary outcomes, suddenly found himself drowning in what-ifs. What if he had chased her? What if he had asked her to stay? What if he had said yes to the family she dreamed of? He opened his mouth, closed it again. He had no words for this moment, no speech, no data, no plan. All he had was the knowledge that something beautiful had grown in the space he abandoned. Ayana turned back toward her laptop, signaling the conversation was over. I'm not asking anything from you, she said gently. I just thought, if you ever did see them, you deserve to know. Kyle nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me, he managed. And for not painting me as something worse than I was. Ayana gave the smallest shrug. You weren't cruel, just unavailable. The word landed like a pin dropped in a cavern. He reached for the door handle. Paused. Are they happy? He asked, not turning around. They are, she said softly. And their whole... Kyle left without another word, but her final line followed him down the hallway, into the elevator, and out onto the street. Their whole, without him. He left the summit without checking out, didn't stop for coffee, didn't glance at his phone. The drive from the airport back to his penthouse felt longer than the flight. The same walls greeted him, the same floor-to-ceiling windows, the same silence he used to consider peaceful. But now, it rang hollow. The elevator opened directly into his unit. No one is waiting, no shoes by the door, no artwork stuck to the fridge, just steel, glass, silence. Kyle dropped his keys on the counter and exhaled slowly. He'd spent years building this home. Polished finishes, curated furniture, smart systems, but now it felt more like a showroom than a life. He loosened his tie, undid the top button of his shirt, and walked into his office. That's where he found the envelope, simple, white, unmarked, sitting dead center on his desk. He froze. Ayana had been here. He opened it slowly, carefully, like it might break. Inside were 4 photographs. No note, no explanation, just them. Zuri, bold eyes, standing tall, her stance unmistakably confident. Leora, quiet, focused, holding a book to her chest. Nasir, slight grin, caught mid-step, full of energy. Cairo, calm, arms crossed, gaze sharp and steady. Kyle sat down. He spread the photos out on the desk like cards in a game he didn't know the rules to. Their names echoed in his mind. Zuri, Leora, Nasir, Cairo. He whispered them. Once, twice, again. Something cracked inside him. Not loud, just enough. Kyle sat in his office for hours. Didn't touch his phone. Didn't speak. The photos lay before him. Still, quiet, alive. He studied each one like it might answer the ache in his chest. Their faces didn't demand anything, but they carried weight, the weight of what he didn't get to see. He imagined their first steps, who wobbled the most, who ran before walking. He imagined the way Ayana must have clapped and laughed and cried, alone but joyful. He imagined 4 tiny shoes by the door, cupcake frosting on cheeks, laughter echoing in a hallway he had never walked down. He tried to picture how their voices sounded. What songs did she sing to them? Who reached for her in the middle of the night when sleep was hard? And what about their birthdays? Did Zuri like balloons? Did Nasir blow out candles with both fists in the cake? Did Ayana sing off-key just to make them laugh? Kyle blinked back a burn in his eyes and turned one photo over. Nothing on the back, just the stillness of being too late. No do-overs, no firsts to claim, only, maybe, a chance at what came next. He wasn't sure what that meant, but he knew one thing. If he had to hear them say, "Where were you?" someday, he wanted an answer better than silence. Kyle stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding one of the photos between his fingers. Zuri's. Her chin was lifted. Her arms were folded. Her stance looked ready for anything, for everything. He turned back toward his shelves. Books, awards, framed headlines from business magazines, all once displayed with pride. Now, they felt hollow, dusty, like proof of a man who built everything except the connection. He pulled down a framed cover story, set it aside, then another, and another. Soon, the shelf looked less like an altar, and more like space he had never made before. He returned to his desk and looked at the photos again. Zuri, Leora, Nasir, Cairo. He said their names quietly, not out of guilt, but out of something that felt like longing. He didn't know what kind of music they liked, what bedtime stories made them laugh, what scared them at night, what they were dreaming of becoming. He didn't know who Zuri leaned on when she felt overwhelmed, or what Leora did when her feelings were too big, or if Nasir liked rain, or if Cairo smiled differently when Ayana wasn't looking. And yet, he wanted to. For the first time, he wanted something he couldn't buy. Not stock, not successful, not a stronger company valuation. He wanted belonging, and he wanted to earn it. Not for Ayana's forgiveness, not even for closure, but for the simple, humbling hope that maybe one day 4 little voices might say his name, and mean it. Kyle stood in the hallway he never used. It connected his bedroom to the guest suite, just a stretch of polished floor, cream walls, and dim lights that clicked on automatically when motion was detected. He'd always thought of it as just that, extra space, functional, unused. But tonight, it felt heavier. He walked slowly down the corridor, letting his hand brush the wall as he moved. Ayana once stood there, years ago. She'd smiled and said, "We could turn this into a nursery someday. Plenty of light. Just needs curtains and color." He had nodded without meaning it, muttered something about it being too soon. She never brought it up again. He reached the door at the end and opened it. The guest room was pristine. The bed was untouched. The window blinds are still factory fitted. There was a full-length mirror and an empty closet. Kyle stepped inside and looked around. For the first time, he pictured crayon drawings taped to the walls, a lamp with stars on the shade, small shoes near the door. Stuffed animals were piled on the bed. One of the boys curled up, fighting sleep. Ayana was humming softly in the doorway. The room wasn't just empty. It was untouched by everything that could have happened. He backed out slowly and closed the door behind him. Not because he was finished, but because he couldn't stand in there any longer. Kyle returned to his office and sat on the floor. Not the chair, not the couch, just the floor. The photos were still there, spread out in front of him like 4 tiny portraits of everything he didn't know how to reach. He didn't know what to do next, didn't know what to say. So he said what came to him, quiet, raw, not rehearsed. "Zuri," he began, voice barely above a whisper, "you look like you'd challenge me. And I think I'd deserve it." He picked up her photo, held it in both hands. "Leora, I wonder if you'd sit beside me without needing to talk. Just be there." He reached for hers next. "Nasir." A broken breath escaped. "I bet you move so fast the world can't catch you." And finally, he touched the last photo. "Cairo, you don't smile in this picture, but I hope you do. I hope you laugh when no one's watching." He closed his eyes. "I missed everything. I know that. I can't undo it. I don't expect you to want me in your world." His voice trembled, but he didn't stop. "But if you ever ask who I am, if you ever ask where I was, I want to be able to say, I came back. Not because I deserved a place, but because I finally understood the cost of never showing up." No one heard him. There was no one to clap, no one to comfort. But for the first time, Kyle didn't feel like running. He stayed on the floor. He whispered their names again, slowly, one by one. and made a silent promise not to fix the past, but to show up for whatever came next. Kyle didn't call. He didn't text. He wrote a letter, handwritten, simple, unfolded 3 times. He mailed it to Ayana's office with no return address. If there's ever a moment, any moment, you'd consider letting me meet them, I would be grateful. Not as a right, but as a man who finally understands what he let go of. He didn't expect an answer. So when Ayana called 4 days later, he stood frozen by his window, phone pressed to his ear in stunned silence. "I got your letter," she said. "Thank you for reading it," Kyle replied quietly. There was a pause, long enough to carry weight, but not long enough to end the call. "I'm willing to try," she said at last, "but on my terms. Of course, you'll meet them as a family friend, not as their father. Understood? You won't bring gifts, you won't make promises, and you won't ask them for anything. Agreed. You'll show up. Listen." That's it. Kyle closed his eyes, exhaled. "Yes, I will." Ayana wasn't angry. She was protective of the peace she had built, of the children who didn't know what it meant to be disappointed by someone who shares their DNA. They arranged to meet at a quiet children's museum on a weekday afternoon. Neutral space, low pressure. Kyle arrived 20 minutes early, wore his most casual button-down, left the driver parked 2 blocks away. He stood near the fish tank display when they walked in. Ayana came first. Then, like a wave that hadn't made up its mind, the children followed. Zuri, Leora, Nasir, Cairo, in real time now. Not photos, not speculation. They were talking quietly, laughing at something Nasir said. Ayana held one of Cairo's hands. Kyle's throat tightened. He didn't step forward. He waited. Ayana made eye contact, gave a small nod, and for the first time in his life, Kyle Stroud waited to be invited. The moment stretched. Kyle stayed near the edge of the exhibit, palms lightly pressed against his thighs, heart thudding in a rhythm he didn't know his own body could make. Ayana turned to the children. "This is Mr. KL. He's a friend of mine." Zuri, the oldest by a few minutes, stepped slightly in front of the others, subtle but protective. She didn't speak, just looked him up and down, calculating, reserved. Leora hovered beside her, eyes wide, clutching the sleeve of her dress between her fingers. Nasir seemed less concerned. His gaze flicked from Kyle to a robot display across the room. He bounced on the balls of his feet, clearly ready to be anywhere else. And Cairo stayed close to Ayana's leg. His hand held her pants pocket. His eyes locked on Kyle, but with no expression, just watching. Kyle didn't expect warmth, didn't expect smiles. He expected this, walls built from the stories not told. He crouched slightly, keeping his tone light. "It's nice to meet all of you. I've heard great things." Zuri blinked. Still no reply. Nasir raised an eyebrow. "From who?" Kyle paused, then smiled gently. "From someone I respect." Leora tilted her head, observing like a scientist trying to understand a new creature. Ayana watched quietly from behind, arms crossed, not judging, just protecting. The museum was bright. Voices echoed gently. A few toddlers ran past them, dragging stuffed animals on leashes. Kyle stayed still. Let the moment breathe. "Would it be all right if I joined you guys for the fish exhibit?" Still no words, but Zuri gave the tiniest nod, barely noticeable. That was enough. They walked in silence. Kyle didn't push, didn't pry. He watched Nasir lose interest in the jellyfish tank after 5 seconds. Watched Leora linger on the educational posters. Watched Zuri stick close to her siblings. Watched Cairo glance at him, then turn away every time their eyes met. Each of them had drawn their lines. Kyle had no intention of stepping over them. He was just grateful to be in the room. He didn't ask for more time. He waited until Ayana offered it. After the museum visit, she sent him a short text. "Zuri has a soccer game next Saturday. If you're available." He replied within minutes. "What time should I arrive?" It was a grey morning. The field was wet. Folding chairs lined the sidelines, dotted with parents in hoodies and sneakers. Kyle didn't wear a suit. He brought a black baseball cap and sat near the back. Zuri played defense. Fierce, focused, fast. She didn't look at him during the game, not once. But when she stole the ball and stopped a goal, Kyle stood and clapped, once, twice, and then sat again, careful not to make it about him. Ayanna glanced at him across the field. No smile, but no coldness either. He showed up again the next week, and the next. Soon, there were other moments. Leora's book fair at school, Nasir's dentist appointment, Cairo's speech practice session on a Thursday afternoon. Ayanna kept the boundaries clear. He didn't sleep over, didn't call randomly, didn't push to be included. But he was invited. To show up, to stay on the edges, to watch. He learned their rhythms. Zuri liked her eggs scrambled, not fried. Leora needed quiet when she worked through math problems. Nasir hated waiting in lines. Cairo only spoke when he trusted your silence first. Kyle never tried to parent. He read bedtime stories over Zoom when Ayanna allowed it. Sometimes he'd fumble a character voice, and Nasir would laugh so hard he couldn't breathe. Once, Cairo fell asleep mid-call, face pressed to a pillow, Kyle's voice still reading from the screen. The next morning, Ayanna sent a picture. Cairo was with the laptop still open beside him, book on the screen, peace on his face. "He listens to you," she texted. Kyle stared at the message for a long time. He didn't reply, because for once, he didn't know how to put into words what that meant. Zuri was always the furthest away, physically, emotionally, in every way. She didn't ignore him, not exactly, but she didn't invite him in either. At soccer games, she never glanced at the sidelines. At school events, she stuck close to Leora and Ayanna. In group conversations, she let others speak first. Unless Kyle was in the room, then she said little at all. Kyle didn't take it personally. He understood what silence meant for a girl like her. It wasn't fear, it was a memory. Even if she didn't have all the facts, her spirit knew who hadn't been there. But something shifted the day she had her school art showcase. It wasn't a major exhibit, just a series of student displays pinned along the gymnasium walls, next to juice boxes and store-bought cookies. Kyle showed up early, not to find Zuri, to find her name. He spotted it halfway down the line, her painting, a splash of blue and bold brushstrokes, a figure, mid-motion, sharp angles, strong shoulders, not a full face, just a shape. He stood in front of it quietly for nearly 10 minutes. When Zuri walked in with her siblings and spotted him there, she stopped, didn't smile, didn't speak, just stared. Kyle turned when he noticed her. "Yours?" he asked softly. Zuri gave the faintest nod. He paused. "It's strong, fierce even. Looks like someone who knows what they want." Another pause. Zuri crossed her arms, tilted her head. "It's supposed to." "Then you nailed it." A flicker crossed her face, like she wasn't used to being praised without a lesson attached to it. Then she asked something unexpected. "Why'd you come?" Kyle looked at her directly. "Because I want to see the world you've built, even if I don't get to be part of all of it." Zuri blinked. Her eyes searched his face. No eye roll, no sarcasm, no walls. She didn't say anything else, but for the rest of the event, she didn't walk away from him either. She let him stand beside her, and when someone complimented her work, she didn't deflect. She just glanced his way. That glance? It didn't say, "I trust you." It said, "I see you," and that was enough. The day of the school art showcase ended like most school events do. Kids buzzing from sugar, parents juggling backpacks, and teachers trying to corral enthusiasm into polite goodbyes. Ayanna stood by the entrance with the other parents, chatting briefly with another mother about pickup lines and afternoon traffic. Kyle lingered by the refreshment table, empty paper cup in hand, eyes flicking toward the exit. The kids were packing up their folders and art supplies. Zuri held hers with practiced care. Leora tucked hers into her backpack with quiet pride. Nasir managed to smudge half his drawing on his arm. Cairo just held his paper with both hands, staring at it as if memorizing it. Kyle didn't expect anything more than what he always received, a small nod, maybe a quiet bye. But then, something changed. Leora was the first. She stepped toward him, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Thanks for coming," she said. Soft, clear. Kyle's throat tightened. "Thanks for letting me." She gave a tiny shrug. "You stayed the whole time. Most people leave after their part's done." Before he could reply, Nasir bounded over. "Did you see mine? It was a lion eating a robot." "I did. Fierce combo. I made it up. Miss Etta said it didn't make sense. She's never been chased by a lion, then." Nasir grinned. "A real one." Kyle smiled back. Zuri walked by next. She didn't say anything, but as she passed, she gave him a quick look, brief but not cold. She stopped, turned slightly, and handed him a second copy of her artist statement. Didn't explain it, just placed it in his hand and kept walking. Cairo was last. He moved slowly, eyes low. Then, as he reached the door, he turned around, walked back to Kyle, stood in front of him. "You gonna come next time too?" Kyle bent slightly to his level. "If you want me to." Cairo stared at him a moment, then gave a single nod, and stepped forward. He wrapped both arms around Kyle's leg. Tight, quick, then let go. Kyle stood there, frozen, breath caught, eyes wet. Ayana looked over from across the room. No words, just a small, almost invisible smile. Kyle didn't drive home right away. He sat in the parking lot long after the school emptied. The paper Zuri had given him rested on the passenger seat. A second copy of her artist statement, printed neatly, folded once. He hadn't asked for it. She hadn't offered it with ceremony, but she gave it. That alone said more than anything spoken. He read it under the pale dashboard light. "My art is about strength. It's about standing still when everyone expects you to move, and moving when no one believes you can. It's about knowing your shape, whether the world understands it or not." Kyle sat with that for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and placed it inside his wallet. A reminder, not just of her, but of them. These weren't loud victories. They didn't come with applause. But every moment, every nod, every eye contact, every cautious word, they were wins. Earned, not bought. Not begged for. Earned. This wasn't a reunion. It wasn't full acceptance. But it was the beginning of being seen. Sometimes, healing doesn't start with forgiveness. Sometimes, it starts with a presence. A quiet one. One that keeps showing up, even when the door is only cracked open. Kyle didn't get a second chance at their first steps. But he's here now. Not to rewrite the past, but to walk beside the future, if they'll let him. If someone has ever changed for you, or if you've ever tried to become better for someone else, tell us in the comments. Did you open the door? Did they walk through it? And if this part tugged at your heart, don't scroll past it. Like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Leonardo Stories. Because the quietest moments are the ones that speak the loudest. It started with text messages. Neutral. Informational. "Dentist for Leora at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Can you join? Zuri needs new cleats. Want to help her pick them out? School meeting Thursday. Optional, but it'd be good for you to hear it firsthand." Kyle responded quickly, always respectfully, never overstepping. No emojis, no small talk. But after a few weeks, Ayana sent something different. "Nasir's trying to convince me pasta is a vegetable. Your thoughts?" Kyle smiled at his screen for a long moment before typing back. "Only if cereal counts as soup." There was no reply right away. But when he showed up to pick Nasir up from karate, Ayana opened the door and greeted him with a smirk. That was the beginning, not of love, of laughter, small, honest, safe. They talked after school pickups, sometimes before bedtime, about the kids, about school projects, about screen time rules and birthday party RSVPs, and slowly about other things. How Kale had stopped traveling so much. How Ayana was preparing her non-profit for expansion. How she missed cooking. How he never learned to. There were no long glances, no flirtation, but there was warmth. And after so many years of silence, warmth was enough. It was a Thursday evening. The kids had fallen asleep on Ayana's living room rug after watching an animated documentary about planets. Kyle had stayed to help clean up, not because he had to, because he wanted to. He gathered juice boxes and folded throw blankets, all while Ayana loaded the dishwasher. For a while, they moved in quiet rhythm. No tension, no rush. And then, as Kyle tossed a stray sock into the laundry bin by the hallway, he stopped, turned, spoke. "I never said I was sorry." Ayana looked up, brow raised. He continued, "Not for walking away from the idea of a family, not for leaving you to carry all of it, not for assuming you'd wait." He took a breath. "I didn't just miss out on their firsts, Ayana. I missed out on you, on who you had to become without me." Her eyes didn't soften immediately, but she listened. "Back then," he said, "I thought clarity meant control. I thought if I couldn't predict it, I couldn't trust it. I told myself kids would make me lose focus, when really, I was just scared of being needed in a way I couldn't schedule." He swallowed hard. "You deserved a partner. You got a ghost." The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt full, like something important had just been placed in the room between them. Ayana dried her hands with a dish towel. "You're not the only one who was scared, Kyle. I was terrified, every day, of being enough. Of failing 4 people who only had me." She folded the towel and set it aside. "But I wasn't angry that you left." She looked at him squarely. "I was angry that you never asked what I needed." Kyle nodded. "I'm asking now, even if it's too late." Ayana didn't respond right away. She just stood there, still, strong, beautiful in a way that didn't need validation. "Then start by being consistent," she said. "Not just with them, with you. Show me this isn't guilt talking." He nodded again, slower this time. "I will." They sat across from each other on the front porch. The kids were inside, asleep. The night was warm, quiet. A breeze moved through the trees like a slow breath. Kyle didn't speak. He waited. Ayana took a sip from her cup of tea before she spoke. Low, clear. "When I left you, I didn't know I was pregnant." Kyle's eyes flickered. "I suspected, but I didn't confirm until a few weeks later. I remember staring at the test for a long time. I wasn't scared. I wasn't sad. I just knew what it meant." She set the cup down on the table beside her. "It meant I couldn't go back. Not because I hated you. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I wasn't going to beg someone to love what I already knew I couldn't live without." Kyle's voice stayed quiet. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone." Ayana shook her head. "Don't pity me. I'm not good. Because I wasn't alone the way you think." She folded her hands in her lap. "I had community. I had moments. I had breakdowns and breakthroughs. I had mornings where I brushed 4 little sets of teeth and cried in the hallway before breakfast. And I had nights where one of them would climb into my bed without a word, just curl up beside me like they knew." She looked him in the eye. "I built a life, Kyle. Not a perfect one, not a glamorous one, but one I'm proud of." Kyle leaned back in the chair, nodding slowly. "You didn't just survive," he said. "No. I grew." They sat in silence again, this time more settled. Kyle looked out at the street. "I used to think growth came from winning, from climbing, from optimizing everything." He turned back toward her. "Now, I think it starts when you stop pretending you're not breakable." Ayana smiled faintly. "Then maybe you're finally ready to be part of something real." Their first shared calendar invite was for a school science fair. Leora was building a volcano. She wanted both of them there, together. Kyle didn't hesitate. He clicked accept. From that point forward, their lives began syncing, not through declarations, but logistics. Ayana sent weekly schedules every Sunday night. Kyle reviewed them carefully, adding notes, confirming pickups, offering backup plans when she had donor meetings or late calls. They attended the same events now, not by accident, but by design. Birthday parties, teacher conferences, Saturday library trips. Sometimes they rode together. Sometimes they met there. Sometimes they debriefed afterward over coffee while the kids played nearby. It wasn't about rebuilding what they lost. It was about supporting what had grown in their absence. One afternoon, they stood shoulder to shoulder in the kitchen, while Zuri explained her class presentation on water filtration. Nasir kept interrupting. Cairo dropped a fork. Leora asked 5 rapid-fire questions about the difference between boiling and distilling. Ayana gave Kyle a sideways glance. "You sure you still want in on this chaos?" Kyle smiled, grabbed a paper towel to clean up the mess. "I've never wanted anything more." She laughed. A full one this time. Not because he was charming, because he meant it. There were no grand gestures, no candlelit dinners, no late-night confessions. But one Tuesday morning, Kyle dropped the kids off at school, and Ayana texted him, "I forgot my lunch. Can you bring me something if you're near the office?" He did. Nothing fancy, just her favorite soup and a bottle of sparkling water. When she saw the label, she raised an eyebrow. "You remembered?" "I've been listening," he said. "That's new. I'm trying to make it normal." She didn't reply. She just reached into the bag, took the soup, and said, "Thanks, really." It started with closeness. Not physical, emotional. The kind that happens when you start finishing each other's sentences without meaning to. When you both instinctively reach for the same juice at the store. When your jokes land in sync. When silence feels like understanding, not absence. One evening, after Zuri's parent-teacher conference, Kyle and Ayana lingered in the parking lot. The kids were home with Ayana's sister. No rush. They leaned against his car, sipping lukewarm coffee from the gas station nearby. "Do you ever think," Kyle said, eyes on the night sky, "about what we could have been if I'd gotten it right the first time?" Ayana didn't answer right away. "Sometimes," she said, "but not the way you think." "How do you think I think?" She turned to him, calm. "That we could have had a smoother love story, one with fewer bruises. Is that wrong?" "Not wrong. Just incomplete." Kyle furrowed his brow. Ayana looked up at the stars. "What we have now, this version, it's earned. It's not fantasy, it's not built on potential, it's built on choices." She looked back at him. "We chose to come back. That matters more than getting it perfect the first time." Kyle nodded quietly. "I don't know where we go from here." "Me neither," she said. Their hands didn't touch. Their bodies didn't lean closer. But the air between them softened. Not with longing, with something gentler, recognition. That maybe, just maybe, what they were rebuilding wasn't just for the kids. It was also for them. The sun had just started setting. That soft, golden hour where everything looks softer than it is. Kyle stood in the doorway of Ayana's living room, not quite inside, not quite out. The door was open. The moment didn't need permission. Ayana was on the rug with the kids. Leora was explaining how shadows work. Nasir was balancing a spoon on his nose. Zuri was braiding one side of Ayana's hair. Cairo was sketching a robot-cat hybrid on a notepad. Ayana just laughed, head tilted, body loose, her arms wrapped loosely around her knees. Kyle leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything. He just watched. And for the first time, the image didn't bring guilt. It brought peace, not because he was part of it, not because it forgave him, but because it was real, undeniable, living, breathing. He blinked slowly, exhaled through his nose, then said, more to himself than anyone else, "I said I didn't want this life." His voice was barely audible. "But this life is everything." He didn't expect anyone to hear. But Ayana looked up, her eyes locked with his. She didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't rush to fill the silence. She just held the moment with him. And in that stillness, without fanfare or force, something passed between them. Understanding that maybe love doesn't return as fireworks. Maybe it returns as a room full of light, crayons on the floor, mismatched socks, and a woman who remembers how to laugh again. The kids fell asleep before the end of the movie. Nasir sprawled across the couch. Zuri curled into a corner with a blanket. Leora rested her head on Ayana's lap. Cairo dozed in Kael's arms, thumb still near his lips. Kael didn't move. He sat there quietly, Cairo's breath warm and steady against his chest. Ayana got up slowly and turned off the TV. She dimmed the lights, then sat beside Kael. Not close, not far. Just there. They didn't talk. The quiet wasn't awkward anymore. It felt like agreement that this life, exactly as it was, didn't need to be redefined. It just needed to be held. Kael looked over at her, whispered, "You ever wonder if we'll mess it up again?" Ayana leaned her head against the back of the couch. "Probably. But now we're not pretending we're invincible." He nodded. "I'm not asking for the past." "Good," she said, "because I don't want to relive it." They both smiled. Small, tired, real. "I'm asking for whatever version of you is willing to stay," she added. Kael looked down at Cairo's sleeping face. "That's the only version I've got left." This wasn't a story about falling in love again. It was about returning. After silence. After mistakes. After time rewrote everything. It was about choosing to show up again. Even when you're not sure what role you play anymore. Even when the love is quieter. And the forgiveness doesn't come with fireworks. If you believe love can return after it's been lost, not as the same flame, but as something softer, wiser, more human, drop a heart in the comments. Tell us, have you ever found your way back to someone? Or wished they found their way back to you? And if this story held you, even for a moment, like it, share it. Subscribe to Mr. Leonardo's stories, where the loudest moments often live in the quietest hearts. Kael didn't make a big announcement. No press release. No social media rollout. No flashy ribbon cutting with suits and speeches. Instead, he just showed up, every day for 6 months, to an old unused section of his headquarters. He met with architects, not for another towering skyscraper, but for a single-floor building made of glass, light and color. A tech lab. But not just any lab. This one was built for kids. Specifically, his kids. It bore no fancy plaque. Just a small inscription near the door. Created for those with questions bigger than fear. Inside, it didn't feel like a company's space. There were bright beanbags, interactive walls, and 3D printers lining the edges. Tables for building, screens for learning, corners for creating. Kael called it the sandbox, a space where young minds could explore technology without pressure or limits. He invited Ayana's non-profit to partner. Her students were the first to test the programs. He didn't oversee it with a clipboard. He showed up with juice boxes and coding kits, wearing sneakers instead of suits. He let Nasir teach him how to use the new robot interface. He let Zuri tell him when his color choices were kinda boring. He let Leora guide the brainstorming board. And Cairo, well, Cairo just liked sitting by his side. Kael no longer measured his worth by quarterly gains. Now it was measured by puzzles solved at 4 p.m., sticky-fingered hugs at 5:30, and bedtime I love yous that landed softly on the heart. For the first time in his life, Kael wasn't chasing the next achievement. He was building a future he could stand still in, one where his children didn't need to wonder if they were an afterthought. The community event was buzzing, kids everywhere, music playing softly, tables lined with paper crafts and glowing laptops. It wasn't a gala. It wasn't an awards show. It was just joy. Honest, unfiltered joy. And Kael was there, not as the headliner, not even as a speaker, just as one of the dads was helping hand out juice boxes and restocking the glue sticks. He wore jeans that had finger paint smudges, a shirt Cairo insisted he ironed himself, poorly, and a name tag that Zuri wrote in pink marker with glitter glue, "My Dad Kael." He didn't walk with his usual stiff shoulders. His pace was easier. His smile was softer. Now and then, someone would walk up and shake his hand, ask about his return to the public eye. But Kael waved it off. "I'm not here for interviews," he'd say, eyes scanning the room for his children. "I'm just here for their science fair." When Leora ran up and tugged his sleeve, asking him to be a judge for her group's tech presentation, Kyle didn't ask what it was about. He followed her without hesitation. Later, during a DIY robotics demo, Kyle sat cross-legged on the floor next to Nasir, helping untangle wires with all the patience in the world. He wasn't trying to win back the past. He was building new memories, quietly, one moment at a time. At one point, a little boy from the neighborhood came up to him with wide eyes and said, "Are you the man who used to be famous?" Kyle chuckled. "Used to be," he said. "Now I'm just a dad who finally figured out what matters." The boy nodded and ran off. Kyle stayed where he was, wiping glue off his hands, the kind of glue that doesn't bind paper to paper. But, person to person, Ayana arrived late. She had been across town at a board meeting, her hair still pinned from the day, heels quieter now from hours on her feet. The kids spotted her first. Leora rushed over, Nasir waved, Zuri gave a took-you long enough smirk, but Kyle didn't see her right away. He was kneeling beside Cairo, helping him calibrate a small robot made from recycled parts. His brows were furrowed, his sleeves rolled up. His voice is gentle. Ayana stood by the door, watching. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't call out, didn't interrupt. She just took in the image. Kyle, once buried in power, now grounded in presence. Her children, once her full responsibility, now fully supported. The life she had dreamed of building alone, now shared. She didn't feel resentment, or pride, or confusion. She felt something simpler. Relief. Not that he'd come back, but that's when he did. He showed up right. He finally saw them. All of them. Kyle looked up and saw her standing there. He smiled. She smiled back. No rush, no explanation, just a moment shared across a room full of laughter and learning. And in that moment, Ayana didn't just see the man Kyle used to be. She saw the father he'd become, the partner he might still be, not in titles, but in the presence. Kyle Stroud never lost his brilliance. He never stopped being the man who could build something from nothing. But for a long time, he thought love was a distraction. Those children were interruptions. That silence meant success. He believed building an empire meant building walls. And for a while, he lived behind them. But time? Time has a way of teaching gently what pain tries to shout. It shows you birthdays you missed, drawings you weren't there to hang on the fridge, questions you never answered. And slowly, it breaks you open, until one day you realize you don't need to build bigger things. You just need to be there when the small things happen. The bedtime giggles, the mismatched socks, the science projects made from soda bottles and dreams. Kyle no longer needed applause. He needed fingerprints on his shirt from Cairo's sticky hands. A random "Dad, watch this," from Nasir. A quiet glance from Ayana that didn't need to say, "I see you," because he already felt it. This wasn't a story about changing the past. It was about choosing to show up in the present, because sometimes the second chance you're praying for is waiting on the other side of an open door. All it takes is walking through it with your hands, your heart, and your eyes open. If this story whispered something to you, don't scroll past. Drop a comment below. Have you ever seen someone become a better version of themselves because they finally chose you? Like it. Share it with someone who believes in healing. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Leonardo Stories, where every story reminds us that love, when it's real, doesn't disappear. It just waits for you to grow into it. Kyle didn't need more wealth. He'd built towers that scraped the sky. He'd signed deals that moved nations. He had staff to carry his burdens and calendars packed with more zeros than rest days. But none of it healed him, because what Kyle needed was redemption. Not public, not loud, but personal. The kind you earn one small moment at a time by tying their shoes, folding art projects, and learning bedtime stories by heart. The kind of redemption that doesn't fix everything, but makes you present enough to stop losing what matters most. Ayana didn't need pity. She wasn't broken. She wasn't waiting for someone to save her. She had built a home with love and intention. She had raised 4 bright lights into a world that can often feel dim. She didn't want a man who could fix her. She wanted peace, consistency, truth over charm, presence over promises. And finally, she got that, on her own first, and eventually, with him too. The children? They didn't need a perfect hero in a suit and tie. They just needed him to show up, to listen, to stay, to try. Here's what this story teaches us. Sometimes, love comes back stronger, not because time heals everything, but because time teaches you what you were never ready to hold. Parenthood doesn't make you weaker. It deepens you. It sharpens your priorities, not your edges. It demands that you show up as more than just a provider, but as someone willing to pause for another person's laughter. Time lost doesn't have to stay lost. Regret may build walls, but accountability builds bridges. You can't go back and change the silence, but you can fill the next moment with sound. Peace is earned, not by fixing everything, but by learning to move gently, even through the wreckage. The greatest kind of change is quiet. It doesn't always come with confetti. Sometimes it shows up in the form of an apology, a bedtime story, or simply staying after years of leaving. Maybe you've been Kyle. Maybe you ran so fast chasing success you didn't realize what you were losing until you slowed down and found yourself alone with your echoes. Or maybe you've been Ayana, strong enough to leave when staying meant shrinking, brave enough to build something beautiful on your own, tired but never broken, quiet but never invisible. And if you're a parent, maybe this hit differently, because love doesn't always look like grand gestures. Sometimes it's just showing up when it would have been easier to walk away. So ask yourself, is there someone waiting for you to return, not with flowers, but with presence? Is there a second chance you're scared to reach for? Are you the version of yourself you'd want your child, or your younger self, to learn love from? You don't have to answer out loud. Just feel it for a moment. Because sometimes the stories that move us are the ones that sound a little too much like our own. So, if this story stirred something in you, even if it was small, even if it was quiet, don't scroll past. Tap the like button, not just because it helps the channel, but because it tells you this moment mattered. Share this story with someone who's learning how to forgive, or someone who needs to know it's not too late to begin again. Drop a comment below. Tell us, have you ever seen someone change for love? Or have you ever changed for someone you didn't want to lose? And if you're new here, subscribe to Mr. Leonardo's Stories, because here we don't just tell stories. We hold space for second chances, for soft hearts and strong decisions, for the people who walk away and the ones who find their way back. Thank you for spending your time with us. We'll see you in the next story, where love is never perfect but always possible. Until then, keep your heart open.